Hi, my name is Kendra. Welcome to my channel. I really had it on my heart to do a testimony video. I want to share about some of the things that I went through growing up, starting from a really young age, and how I got to where I am now. I wondered how I was going to do this video and how it would all fit into one, so this might be a several part video. I'm going to start with basically the beginning of my life. And how I ultimately ended up coming to the Lord and being set free from abuse and addictions and everything in between. When I was 3 years old, it might have started earlier than that. I just remember my earliest memories was around that time. I was sexually abused by my grandfather, and it happened continuously up until my teenage years, and I hid it my whole life. I didn't share it with anybody, and I kind of just buried it. And as I got older, in my early teens, it caused me to grow up pretty quickly. I think that's what led into my early use of alcohol and tobacco and sexual exposure. I lost my virginity when I was 12. I started smoking cigarettes when I was, and drinking and smoking weed when I was 11 years old. And really, I just kind of snowballed from there. I started doing meth when I was 13, and by the time I was 16 years old, I was using heroin regularly. I was very addicted to it, and I was using every other drug that I could get my hands on. I lived a very promiscuous, dangerous lifestyle. I was just a really rotten person inside and out. I took advantage of all my friends. I was someone that couldn't be trusted, for sure. I stole from my family, I stole from my mom. And I was really just a corrupt young child who lived a really reckless, dangerous lifestyle. I got a fake ID by the time I was 16, and living in Southern California, I was going to clubs in Hollywood on the weekends, and you know, I thought it was really cool hanging out with all these celebrities and all these people, you know, and I was experimenting more and more and always lying about my age and just living this really fast-paced, dangerous lifestyle. At 17 years old, I was introduced to prostituting. You have this whole idea that it's gonna be so glamorous and you have an escort, and it was just a thrill. It was a new thrill that I didn't mind engaging in, just because I had honestly no moral values at that time in my life. And so I had engaged in prostitution, and one day it was a sting, and when I started accepting payment from a man, the cops busted down the door and tackled me to the ground basically and took me in, and I tried telling them I'm 17 years old, and they didn't believe me because by this time I was fully covered in tattoos, and I definitely did not look my age at that time. So they eventually got a hold of my probation officer and verified my age. My probation officer told me that I'm gonna have to do minimum 6 months to a year. So I knew I had some time before I ended up going in. I think I knew I had about 2 to 3 months or so. And my whole plan was to party my little arse off until I got there, and also sneak in a pill bottle, put a pill bottle, you know, in places, and go in there with enough drugs to stay high for 6 months. And that was my honest to God plan. And 21 days before I ended up going into this facility, I had an encounter with God that changed my life. It was July 21st, 2008. I had been at a party the night before. My friends left. Like usual, I told them, don't worry, I'll just find a ride, I'll sleep with someone, I'll do something, I'll get home somehow, don't worry about me, I want to just hang out and party. And I was like an hour away from my house at that point. And I remember waking up from that party in the morning being really surprised that my purse was next to me and I hadn't gotten robbed, because I was always getting stuff stolen from me because I would black out. And so I ended up going somewhere in the house, and when I came back to where my purse was, I noticed that my wallet was gone, like my money was gone. So at that point, I freaked out. I went up to the guy who I thought stole the money from me and punched him in the face. And he tried chasing me to beat me up. But it was at that moment that my ride had pulled out front. I did not have a car. Well, I had a car, but I didn't have a license because I was on probation and that was taken from me. I jumped in the car, we sped away. I'm in the back of the car seat and I'm thinking, you know, why is all this bad stuff happening to me? You know, like I can't keep a purse to save my life. Like I've gotten robbed so many times the past 2 months, and all these horrible things had just been like happening. I heard this like voice in my heart, like I just knew that I heard and I understood and interpreted, you deserve this. You deserve this. And it shook me, and I knew that that wasn't my thought. Like I knew that that was God. I knew it was true, and I felt immediately convicted, and so I kind of brushed it off. And I get home and I'm smoking a cigarette outside, and I hear that voice again, and inside of my heart it was like, you know, go open your Bible. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna open my Bible. Like, what Bible? You know, where is it, first of all? Second of all, it's probably collecting dust on who knows what shelf in my house. And so 3 times I heard that, and eventually I put out my cigarette and I went inside and I grabbed my Bible and I just, you know, willy-nilly found it and opened it. And what I opened to, it shocked me. I opened straight to Ephesians 5. As I started reading it, verse by verse, it was like literally exactly everything I had been going through in my life. And it spoke to me so profoundly. And I started feeling, you know, what I know now to be the presence of God. But at the time, you know, I started feeling my heart just started pounding, and these big tears started welling up and rolling down my cheeks, and my whole body felt like it was on fire, and I had to like sit down and lay down on my bed because I couldn't stand. And I was just like overwhelmed with this presence of God in my room that I had never encountered anything like that before. As I was reading Ephesians 5, verse by verse, it was almost like a movie played out in front of me in chronological order of like all these things that I had just been thinking about on the car ride home. It's kind of difficult to explain that moment, but it really spoke to me and it resonated with my spirit, and there was no doubt in my mind the sin that I was in. And the first time I read Ephesians 5, it was like that. It just played out like a movie before me. And God was showing me specifically in chronological order, like what I had been doing wrong. And after I read that, I felt like I got spanked, you know, in a loving way, but it was a really serious moment for me with God, because I felt so bare and so raw and such a, like, I felt like such a sinner. I was like, what have I been doing? Like, this is so wrong. What I've done to my friends, what I'm doing to myself, what I've done to my family, how I'm living, like, this is wrong. After this, I felt that voice again speak to my heart. This time it said, read it again. You know, I knew to read that chapter again. So I am reading Ephesians 5 again, but this time I get a whole new perspective, revelation, understanding, and interpretation from it. It was like I was reading a completely different chapter in the Bible, but it was the same chapter I just read. And God started showing me by revelation what I had to do to change my life. And so after this, after the second time that I read it, I heard that voice again, and he said, daughter, read it again, in a loving, calm way. And by this time, like, I am completely wrecked. My shirt is soaking wet because I was crying so hard I could hardly breathe. And the third time I read it, I got a different interpretation, and it spoke to me so clearly and so profoundly. He started making me promises about my future. He started showing me how I was going to be physically healed, because as a consequence of my actions, I had you know, a burden to bear. I just had a lot of things that were attached to me because of the sinful life that I had lived, that I thought that were going to be with me for the rest of my life. Let's just put it like that. God started showing me he was going to heal me. I was going to be used by him. I was going to be a light for him. I was receiving these things, writing these things down beside myself, and that moment in time absolutely changed the course of my life. I ended up going into the facility with 21 days sober, and I took out all my extensions. My hair was bleach blonde at the time. I started growing it out. I didn't care. I took off all my makeup. Like, I was there to pursue God. His timing is perfect. Like, if I hadn't been locked up for that amount of time, I wouldn't have had that focus and that intimacy with him that I so desperately needed at that point in my life, when I was walking away from this like rabid, crazy lifestyle that I had lived for so many years. So when I was in there, I really drew close to the Lord. This is for another video for another time, because there's just so many stories in between the story that are just gonna take a lot of time to explain. But I was physically healed. I was really exposed to the supernatural and the demonic when I was in there. God just used that time to really train me and to teach me. After I got out of the facility that I was in, I started working full time, and really wanted to stay sober, and was so new in my walk with God, still trying to learn the Bible, still trying to find my place in the world. And I met my husband, my first husband, and he was a recovering addict as well. I just really appreciated that he understood, sobriety, and had kind of walked a similar walk that I had walked. But we ended up relapsing together, and we kind of went down this rabbit hole of craziness. There were times that we would try to stop using the drugs and get back on track, but we really kind of yo-yoed back and forth. But it was in this time that I had met a Hollywood producer, and I was basically promised the world. I met this man because he came into my work looking for the girl that we used for our advertising. He was working in a film and wanted to contact this woman who he thought would look good in the movie, in the scene, I guess. And I took that as an opportunity, and I was a singer.
Yes. This is where we should have had what you call it at.
And my whole dream at that point in my life was to make music and to be a singer and to do acting and all these things. So I started pitching myself to him, and I sang for him, and he immediately took me on as this young girl, malleable. I was very fit and thin and blonde and Southern California, the whole 9 yards, and willing to basically do anything to prove to him that I was serious about pursuing a career in music and acting and all this. So I got my acting license. I was running miles and miles on the beach. I was doing etiquette training with him. I was just so excited for what the future held. And after several months, when we had met with lawyers and different producers and things like that, and I knew for a fact that this was the real deal. I was approached by him after one of our meetings, and there was a record deal on the table for me, an investment of $500,000. And it was in that time where he started revealing to me that we were going to be having a relationship by design, and nobody's going to invest this kind of money in somebody without expecting something in return, if you know what I mean. So I basically told him, I'm like, so you want me to have sex with you? And he said, well, it would only be when I'm in town, because he had homes all over the world and he was traveling all the time, and I would basically be his like SoCal girl, and I scratch his back, he scratches my back kind of deal, I guess. It was so God in that moment, because my fiance at that time and I were like so rocky and so yo-yo-y, and I had a history of promiscuity anyways, and this was my dream. So normally I feel like it would have been pretty easy for me to say, just like, screw it, let's do it. I'll just have, a good time with you for an hour, and then you'll be off to London tomorrow, and then I get my record deal. Like, how hard is that? That would have been my mentality in the past, and I could feel the temptation rising up to revert to that. But in this moment, I feel like God gave me the strength and met me, and I told him no. I told him I can't do that. If this was a blessing from God, and this was, a calling from him in my life at this time, I wouldn't be required to sleep with you to reach that. And he was flabbergasted. He was like, he didn't even know what to say. He was a really nice guy, and he was handsome, but he couldn't understand like how I would turn down something so simple for like a lifetime opportunity like that. He basically told me, there's a million girls that would like kill to be in your position right now, and for you to just turn this down because of that is like, you'll never make it in Hollywood. If this is what you want to do for your career, he was polite, but he's like, you'll never make it if that's something that you're not willing to do. So that was a big reality check. And after that, I was so absolutely heartbroken that I went and tried to get like all these oxys, and I tried to get drunk, and I was just like trying to be out of my mind, but I couldn't get high and I couldn't get drunk, and I was like upset about it, and I was getting frustrated. And I remember taking something and gashing my arm, and just like, it was like a meltdown, it was like everything, the sky is falling. So after my world kind of crashed down, I was just in the pits. It was in that moment that God really met me in his mercy, and and he saw that I'd relapsed, and he saw I was going through a hard time. And I remember this one day, I don't know the date, but I just had this feeling in my heart like something's coming, like something's gonna happen. Like I just knew like some kind of experience or something was gonna happen with the Lord. I remember telling Austin about it because at the time we were living together before we were married. I just remember telling him like God's gonna do something. Now in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, okay, well that's why, because I ended up having an experience that night with the Lord, and had I not forewarned him, he might have, run up to me and be like, why are you crying? What's wrong with you? What's going on? But I had already told him that I was sensing I was going to have this encounter with God. He knew to leave me alone in the moment of it. Basically, I got home from work, and I was just really led to watch a Sidroth video and an awesome testimony about this Baptist preacher who was filled with the Holy Spirit. And after his experience, he kind of had to change his belief system because he didn't believe in angels, he didn't believe in tongues, he didn't believe in the gifts of the Spirit or any of that. So anyways, at the end of this testimony video, I just started feeling this joy come over me, and the presence that I had felt in July started coming over me, and I recognized it immediately as God's Spirit. And my fiance was on the other side of the room. He was like watching a show or whatever, and I just started weeping. And usually I wouldn't like to do something like this in front of somebody else, but God had already prepared my heart earlier that day, and I had prepared Austin, so everything was just organized and ordered and just flowed so beautifully. I had my hands lifted in the air, and I could see these big hands like reaching down from heaven, big hands holding my hands as I held them in the air, and I was weeping, and my whole body was like super hot. My cheeks were flushed and red, and I just started speaking in tongues, and it just started coming out. This guy in the video that I was watching, it was like he was looking at the camera and praying for somebody, and he was praying for a young woman. He was praying for me, and as he was praying and saying things like prophetically in the camera, it was like happening to me at the same time. It was like happening, and then he was saying it like a second later. So it was just amazing. It was the first time I'd ever experienced anything like that. So it was so confirmed to me that this was God doing it. And I didn't even know about tongues. Like I had nobody in my life that I'd even known that spoke in tongues. Like I had to Google it, I'm like, what is this? Like, what are these gifts of the Spirit? So that was another really pivotal moment in my life with God that catapulted me into my sobriety again and being excited about God, and it just gave me the strength that I needed to like keep going. Okay, I had to jump on. I left out some important details. On July 21st, 2008, when I had my first radical life-changing encounter with God, I walked away from that encounter with no withdrawals and no desire to continue using drugs. I also was set free from a really serious porn addiction. I was completely set free that day. Fast forward to when I was given the gift of tongues, I had been on serious sleeping medication because from years prior, I had really bad sleep apnea, insomnia, so I had to be basically put on tranquilizers just to be able to sleep throughout the night. And after that encounter that I had with God, it was at nighttime, and I remember going to take my sleeping medication, and right before I put it to my mouth, I heard that still small but very powerful voice, and it said, "Stop, you're healed." And I just knew that I knew I was completely free and healed. And that was the last time I took sleeping medication, and before then, if I didn't take that, I would be like up for days and days and days. That's just one of many healing testimonies. I just wanted to insert that because it's relative to this testimony story. Because after I relapsed, when you relapse and you're in drugs and you're in those cycles, like it's really hard sometimes to get out. And it's no joke, it really is hard. And I believe that if it weren't for God intervening in my life in those like major ways, that I would still be probably using drugs, to be honest. Anyways, my fiance and I ended up getting married. We unfortunately just didn't grow in the same direction together. So at that time, I was really hungry to have fellowship. So I prayed to God for a mentor. Then I was contacted by this woman on YouTube shortly after, and I really figured it was of the Lord because I had just prayed for this, and she had this like crazy supernatural testimony, and you know, it was really the only person that I knew that I was able to talk to about these things, that had encountered God in these kinds of ways. So I really absorbed it all. And it didn't matter that a lot of it didn't really match the Bible. I didn't know a lot of the Bible at that time. I just knew that I knew Jesus and what he had done in my life and how he had changed my life. And so I really clung to this woman. And the timing of it all was like really interesting. So I really thought it was God. Marriage was kind of falling apart. Stuff was going wrong in every direction in California. Family relationships, like just stuff it just seemed to hit me from all sides. And so I took our baby boy with me to Texas to go stay with my dad. And this woman happened to live about 30 minutes away from where my dad lived in Texas. And they were just like really deep into like really different things that I didn't even know about. And they didn't even match the Bible, but I didn't even know at that time. Or if I did know that it didn't match the Bible, it was explained away. This is where my story takes a really dark, long turn. It's going to take a lot of time to explain what I went through when I joined up with this woman and other members that were part of this group. But I will summarize and say that I was so on fire for the Lord that in a very vulnerable time in my life, I jumped into something that I thought was of God, but it wasn't till I escaped 8 years later that I realized all the things were like very wrong with it and very anti-Bible. But in a nutshell, I ended up losing my family, losing my baby, losing everything, losing contact with my family, and I was missing for many years, and a lot of people thought I was dead. And I was forced to comply in very manipulative ways, under terror and fear constantly, living a life where holiness was proclaimed, but behind the scenes, it was the absolute opposite of what the Bible calls holiness. I'm free from that now, and like I said, that's another story from another time, and God is amazing. He's always rescued me every single time I have been in trouble or I have made a mistake. He's always been there every single time. And that's the point I want to make in this video, that no matter where you are, no matter what season you are in life, like God is so faithful. He's sovereign. That's what I've learned the most in this journey of 31 years of my life. I feel like I should be like 60 by now because of all the things that I've lived through. But you know, one takeaway from this video, I hope, can be that God is sovereign and God is for you. He loves us. I lived so many years when I was part of this group in fear and terror of constantly God judging me for the littlest thing, and just no grace and all works, and you know, just adultery behind the scenes, not necessarily me, but like it was happening, and there was all these things in the name of God's will, and secret things and secrecy among members, and it was just a really confusing, dark time. And coming out of that, when I escaped, which is another story of how like I met my now husband, you know, coming out of that left me really confused, really hurt, really angry. God has allowed me to forgive the people that took advantage of God's word, and I'm still working through it every day, and I do forgive. God has also been able to heal my heart from what happened with my grandfather. I don't speak to him obviously, but I have completely forgiven him. I just feel like forgiveness is so important to release you from that person that hurt you or took advantage of you or manipulated you in some way. You know, if you hold on to unforgiveness and bitterness, you can't grow into the person that God needs you to be. And one of the things lately that God has really shown me, that has stuck with me, is that God doesn't hurt us, but he does teach us life experiences. He does teach us things. And sometimes it's through a trial and through a wilderness, because that's how we learn and that's how we grow. And there's a lot more stories that I could share, that I will eventually share, like how I met my husband and how that whole thing came to be, which is an absolute amazing miracle. And thank God I've been able to reconnect with my son, even though he still has a lot of questions and, you know, bitterness and anger about how I could just leave him. He doesn't understand that it was not necessarily like a choice that I made. I didn't just want to surrender my family like that. But you know, with cults, it's a very difficult dynamic to understand, with the brainwashing and the control and the fear especially that gets instilled inside of you. And so my prayer is one day, like, he'll be able to fully understand that. But I'm just so grateful that I have the restoration in my life at this point of family and friends and freedom, being able to be free in the love of God. And I'm still healing. I'm still on that journey of healing, but God has been so good and so gracious to really carry me through not only that really dark, most recent season of being in a cult, but all my seasons past from when I was a little girl. And I really think that it's a miracle that I'm not, one, dead by now, and two, an atheist. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed my testimony, and I hope you can gain something from it. And yeah, if you have any questions, or you want to email me, or you want to share your testimony or story, I'd really love to hear it. I get so encouraged hearing other people's testimonies and what God has done. Like, that's what we're to do. We're supposed to share so God can get the glory, and God can work in that testimony in other people's lives and encourage them and let them know that they're not alone in these things. You know, like, sucky things happen. We live in a fallen world, but you know, we don't have to stay in that, and we can learn from our mistakes and grow from them and allow God to turn it into something so beautiful that only God can do. Like, only He can make beauty from ashes. Thank you for checking out my video and hanging in till the end. God bless. Bye.